I just want to stay with that trade negotiations with the United States and why you are not so bullish about that. And
with Trump pulled at G7 because Trump returned to Washington early. We then saw Lee not go to the NATO summit a week later, so he lost an opportunity to meet with Trump there. We do believe that there will be a face-to-face summit probably by the end of the month.
Donald Trump has told a rally at a U.S. steel plant in Pennsylvania that he intends to double U.S. steel import tariffs to 50%.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Thompson clutched a letter from President Donald Trump addressed to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, warning of steep tariffs on Canadian goods set to hit on August 1. On Monday, Trump intensified his trade offensive, dispatching letters to Canada and a handful of other nations, announcing new tariff rates. Simultaneously, he softened the blow by signing an executive order extending the deadline for reciprocal tariffs excluding China to August 1, delaying the original July 9 start date. These reciprocal tariffs, initially slated for Wednesday, vary in severity compared to April's levels, with Canada facing a hefty 25% rate. When pressed at a White House dinner Monday night on whether the August 1 deadline was set in stone, Trump hedged, "It's firm, but I'm open to talks. If they call and want to negotiate something else, we'll listen." Canada's Trudeau was among the first to receive Trump's letter, alongside leaders from Malaysia, South Africa, and Laos. Canada's 25% tariff matches Malaysia's, while Laos faces a punishing 40%. Trump later announced additional letters to Tunisia, Serbia, Indonesia, and Thailand, bringing the total to 8 nations targeted on Monday. In each letter, Trump highlighted America's trade deficits, where the U.S. imports far more from these countries than it exports. He also criticized foreign policies he claims block American goods, urging leaders to manufacture in the U.S. to dodge tariffs. The August 1 deadline marks the end of a tariff pause enacted in April, when affected nations faced a baseline 10% tariff. A cargo ship stacked with containers departs Vancouver's port, symbolizing Canada's pivot to new markets as U.S. tariffs loom. Trump warned that retaliatory tariffs from these nations could trigger even higher rates, separate from sector-specific tariffs like the existing 25% on autos, a White House official confirmed. Despite Trump's frequent threats against the European Union, no letters were sent to the bloc. "We can't comment on letters we haven't seen," said EU spokesperson Anna Muller on Monday. Ireland's Trade Minister Liam O'Connor added, "This extension to August 1 gives the EU and U.S. time to hammer out a deal that benefits both sides." Canada's response was swift. On Tuesday, Trudeau formed a trade task force expressing deep concern over the U.S. tariffs and vowing to negotiate a bilateral deal. Canada's finance ministry warned it would act decisively if market volatility spikes, though specifics remain unclear. Malaysia, also facing a 25% tariff, pledged to pursue balanced trade talks, while South Africa's President Thabo Mbeki called the 30% tariff rate misleading, citing flawed trade data and urged local firms to diversify exports. The stakes are massive. In 2024, the U.S. imported $400 billion in goods from the 8 targeted countries, with Canada alone accounting for $240 billion, making it America's second largest trading partner. Higher tariffs could drive up prices for U.S. consumers, particularly for Canada's top exports like steel, lumber, and auto parts. Canada supplied 45% of U.S. steel imports in 2023, and tariff hikes could inflate costs for cars, construction, and machinery. Malaysia, facing a 25% tariff down from 28% in April, is a key source of electronics, with the U.S. importing $20 billion in semiconductors last year. Indonesia and Thailand, both facing 30% tariffs, are major apparel and machinery hubs. Laos, hit with a 40% tariff, supplies niche minerals critical for tech manufacturing. Trump's letter to Thailand's prime minister lowered the rate from 45% in April, offering a slight reprieve. Markets shuddered as Trump's letters rolled out. The S&P 500 dropped 0.85%, its worst day in a month. U.S. Listed shares of Canadian firms like Magna International and Bombardier fell 5% and 4% respectively amid fears of retaliatory tariffs. The Dow slid 450 points or 1%, while the Nasdaq dipped 0.9%. Asian markets opened flat Tuesday, reflecting uncertainty. Canada's strategic pivot is stealing the spotlight. As U.S. tariffs loom, Canada is rerouting steel and lumber to Europe and Asia at pre-tariff prices, capitalizing on its low-carbon hydroelectric grid. In Brussels, trade officials quietly secured Canadian steel contracts, anticipating U.S. price spikes. Asian buyers, particularly in Japan and South Korea, followed suit, shifting from U.S. suppliers. This realignment embeds Canada deeper into global markets, sidelining U.S. producers grappling with tariff fallout. The ripple effects extend to energy markets. Steel and lumber production are energy-intensive, and Canada's shift could reduce U.S. Midwest oil demand, altering regional energy flows. Mexico, watching closely, may accelerate its own steel investments, further challenging U.S. dominance. Canada's playbook shows how economic resilience can double as diplomatic leverage, turning tariffs into a strategic opportunity. For U.S. manufacturers, the choices are grim. Absorb soaring costs or reroute supply chains through Canada, risking delays and higher prices. Automakers and construction firms face sticker shock, with steel prices up 50% since May, hitting $1,300 per ton. Canada's response goes beyond defiance. In May 2025, its non-U.S. exports surged 8% to 61 billion CAD, driven by a 35% jump in steel to Germany and a 25% increase in lumber to Japan. These redirected flows cushioned a 10% drop in U.S. bound shipments, averting a deeper trade slump. Small Canadian firms, from Ontario's auto parts makers to British Columbia's timber mills, tapped trade agreements like CETA and CPTPP to break into EU and Asian markets. This diversification signals Canada's refusal to be boxed in by U.S. tariffs. By broadening its buyer base, Ottawa gains leverage in trade talks, forcing Washington to rethink its strategy. The tariff escalation threatens to reshape global supply chains. If Canada locks in its cost advantage, EU and Asian buyers may permanently shift north, disrupting decades-old trade patterns. U.S. consumers could face higher prices for cars, homes, and electronics, while manufacturers scramble to adapt. The next move depends on whether Trump doubles down or negotiates. Share your thoughts below and hit that like button to keep up with this unfolding trade war. As U.S. manufacturers reel from tariff-induced chaos, Canada's industrial hubs are powering forward. On July 2, 2025, Canada's S&P Global Manufacturing PMI slumped to 45.8, marking 7 months of contraction, a clear casualty of Trump's 50% steel and lumber tariffs. The export orders index tanked to 39.5, the lowest since April 2020, signaling a collapse in U.S. demand. Yet in Ontario, electric vehicle parts factories announced fresh investments, and Quebec's hydroelectric projects surged, drawing green tech investors eager to dodge tariff turbulence. In 2023, Canada's automotive sector exported $22 billion in vehicles and components, anchoring its pivot to global markets and showcasing deep integration. Ottawa committed over 900 million CAD annually to research and development, fueling innovation zones in Toronto, Vancouver, and Saguenay. These funds drive breakthroughs in steel alloys, sustainable construction materials, and green energy tech, safeguarding high-tech jobs from tariff-driven cuts. This bold move sent shockwaves through Brussels and Tokyo, where trade officials scrambled to lock in Canadian steel and lumber at pre-tariff rates. In late May, EU buyers secured Canadian supplies, wary of U.S. price spikes. Asian markets, especially South Korea and Japan, followed, shifting away from U.S. raw materials. Canada's production flows through a low-carbon grid powered by long-term hydro, Quebec deals, ensuring stable energy costs. For U.S. automakers and builders, the options are dire. Absorb crippling premiums or navigate foreign supply chains, risking delays and higher costs for vehicles and infrastructure. Canada's response transcends boosting production. In May 2025, port upgrades in Halifax were fast-tracked to deep water berths at Pier 21, and Dartmouth now handle vessels over 68,000 tons with direct rail lines moving steel and lumber from Ontario's mills to ocean carriers, bypassing U.S. routes. In 2023, Halifax moved 715,000 tons of cargo, cementing its role as a global trade gateway. This corridor shaves days off shipments, letting EU buyers secure materials at pre-tariff prices. Expanded intermodal yards meet Europe's strict low-emission standards. Traders in Brussels and Seoul rushed to book Canadian slots when U.S. steel premiums spiked 50% to $1,300 per ton in June 2025. U.S. manufacturers watch helplessly as competitors tap Canada's efficient ports. Local communities cheered new jobs at docks and rail yards. Environmental groups praised the shift to electric-powered cranes and reduced trucking emissions. Ottawa's strategy proves infrastructure can outsmart political storms. As shipping season intensifies, Halifax's cranes hum under Atlantic skies, reshaping North American trade routes. Canada's ports are rewriting the tariff and trade war narrative with tangible impact. In the end, Canada flipped Trump's 50% tariffs and nearly 25 billion CAD in counter duties into a strategic advantage, from Aceros to Canada's $1.5 billion steel mill upgrade in Saguenay to a bold export pivot. Modern logistics and green tech are redefining supply chains. The critical question is whether this momentum can outlast the next tariff escalation. If Canada sustains its cost edge, global buyers may permanently shift north, disrupting decades-old trade patterns and igniting the next trade battle. This pivot reverberates globally. In May 2025, Canada's non-U.S. exports soared 6.5% to 62 billion CAD, driven by a 38% surge in lumber to Germany and a 30% jump in steel to South Korea. These redirected flows softened a 12% drop in U.S.-bound shipments, averting a deeper trade slump. Small and medium-sized Canadian firms, from Alberta's steel fabricators to Quebec's timber processors, leveraged CETA and CPTPP agreements to penetrate European and Asian markets. This diversification sends a clear message: Canada won't be held hostage by Washington's tariff politics. By expanding its buyer base, Ottawa strengthens its industrial backbone and gains leverage in trade talks. For U.S. manufacturers, the fallout is brutal. Facing 50% tariffs, they must pay record premiums or reroute supply chains, risking delays and costlier production. As EU and Asian buyers lock in Canadian materials at pre-tariff rates, Trump's policies risk backfiring, cementing Canada's role as a global supplier. The trade war's next chapter hinges on whether the U.S. can counter Canada's strategic shift or lose more market share. Canada's green tech hubs are thriving. In Ontario, EV battery plants secured new funding, and British Columbia's renewable energy projects drew investors sidestepping tariff pain. Canada's aerospace sector, exporting $20 billion in 2023, bolsters its diversification, signaling robust global ties. Energy markets feel the shift too. Steel and lumber production are power-hungry, and Canada's pivot could lower U.S. Midwest oil demand, reshaping energy trends. Ottawa's approach transforms tariffs into a tool for resilience and diplomatic clout. Port upgrades are a game changer. Halifax's expanded berths and rail lines slash shipping times, meeting Europe's green standards and undercutting U.S. suppliers. Local jobs surged, and environmental groups lauded low-emission infrastructure. This blueprint shows how logistics can sidestep political firestorms. Canada's ports aren't just moving steel and lumber. They're rewriting the trade war playbook with efficiency and foresight. The stakes are enormous. If Canada maintains its edge, global buyers may permanently shift north, upending long-standing supply chains. U.S. consumers face higher prices for cars, homes, and machinery, while manufacturers scramble to adapt. Canada's $1.5 billion investment and export diversification are more than a trade tactic. They're a high-stakes gamble that could redefine global material flows for years. Will Trump escalate tariffs further, or will Canada's strategy prevail? The critical date is July 21, when Canada adjusts its counter tariffs. If it holds its cost advantage, global markets may lock in Canadian steel and lumber, disrupting decades of trade patterns. U.S. Factories face a stark choice: absorb soaring costs or overhaul logistics, risking delays and higher prices. Canada's pivot sent shockwaves through global markets. In Saguenay, steel mills hum with new investments, while Vancouver's ports bustle with EU-bound cargo. Ottawa's playbook shows how economic resilience can double as geopolitical muscle. Markets reflected the turmoil. The Dow dropped 430 points, or 95% after Trump's tariff announcements. U.S. listed shares of Canadian firms like Stelco and Canfor fell 5% and 8% respectively amid fears of retaliation. The S&P 500 slid 8%, and the Nasdaq dipped 9%, marking the worst trading day in a month. Asian markets opened flat, bracing for uncertainty. Canada's response is a masterclass in strategy. By redirecting steel and lumber to Europe and Asia, Ottawa sidesteps U.S. tariffs and strengthens global ties. Small businesses, from Manitoba's metal fabricators to Nova Scotia's sawmills, are tapping new markets, reducing reliance on the U.S. This shift could reshape global trade for decades, forcing Washington to rethink its approach. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we track the next twist in this global trade showdown. Thanks for watching.